I should have known something was wrong the moment I walked into the restaurant. The private dining room at the Willow House was already full. Soft jazz played through hidden speakers. Candles flickered along the center of a long oak table. Family photographs had been arranged on display boards around the room. Pictures of birthdays, Christmas mornings, beach vacations, and anniversaries stretching back decades. Most of them featured my husband, Robert. Even after 18 months, seeing his face still caught me off guard. A smile. A laugh. A moment frozen in time. For 42 years, he had been the center of my life. And tonight was supposed to be about remembering him. A memorial dinner. Nothing formal. Just family and a few close friends gathering to celebrate the man we all loved. At least that was what I thought. Grandma. Two small arms wrapped around my waist before I could even set down my purse. I smiled immediately. My granddaughter Emma looked up at me with bright eyes. Mom said we're sharing stories about Grandpa tonight. I brushed a hand through her hair. I think Grandpa would like that. She grinned and ran back toward the dessert table. For a moment, my chest felt lighter. Children had a way of making grief feel smaller. At least for a little while. I looked around the room. My son Daniel stood near the windows talking with several relatives. His wife Melissa was arranging place cards at the table. Everything looked normal. But something felt different. Subtle. A tension I couldn't quite name. People smiled when I greeted them. Yet several conversations seemed to stop when I approached. I shifted away a little too quickly. Whispers died mid-sentence. I told myself I was imagining it. Grief changes people. Families become awkward around loss. Maybe that was all it was. Maybe. Linda. I turned. Melissa was walking toward me. She wore a black dress and a polite smile. The kind of smile that never quite reached her eyes. Glad you made it. I nodded. Wouldn't miss it. For a second, neither of us spoke. Then she glanced toward the far end of the room. A strange expression crossed her face. Gone almost instantly. But I noticed it. You okay? I asked. Of course. Her smile returned. Perfect. Controlled. Tonight should be interesting. Interesting. Not emotional. Not meaningful. Interesting. Something about that word unsettled me. Before I could ask what she meant, she excused herself and moved away. I watched her disappear into a cluster of relatives. A small knot formed in my stomach. I didn't know why. The dinner began 20 minutes later. Everyone found their seats. Wine was poured. Food was served. At first, everything followed the expected rhythm. Stories about Robert. Memories. Laughter mixed with tears. His brother shared a story about a fishing trip from 30 years ago. A family friend described how Robert had helped him through a difficult divorce. Even Daniel spoke. His voice cracked halfway through. And hearing my son struggle through memories of his father nearly broke my heart. I reached across the table and squeezed his hand. For a moment he squeezed back. Then slowly pulled away. The gesture was small. Almost invisible. But I felt it. Something had changed. I just didn't know what. As the evening continued, I noticed Melissa becoming unusually quiet. She wasn't drinking much. Wasn't participating much. Instead, she kept checking her phone. Watching. Waiting. Almost as if she were counting down to something. An hour later, dessert arrived. Coffee cups appeared. The formal part of the evening seemed finished. People relaxed. Conversations scattered around the room. Then Melissa stood up. The sound of her chair scraping against the floor immediately drew attention. Several people looked up. Including me. She lifted her wine glass. I'd like to say something. The room grew quiet. I assumed she wanted to share a memory about Robert. That would have been normal. Expected. Instead, she looked directly at me. And suddenly every instinct in my body told me something was terribly wrong. I've spent months debating whether I should bring this up. A nervous laugh escaped from someone at the far end of the table. It died quickly. Melissa wasn't smiling anymore. Neither was anyone else. Daniel looked uncomfortable. Melissa. He said softly. She ignored him. Her eyes never left mine. Because tonight is supposed to be about honoring Robert. The room became silent. Not polite silence. The kind that feels heavy. Dangerous. Then she reached into her purse and pulled out several photographs. My pulse immediately quickened. I had no idea why, but suddenly I couldn't breathe properly. Melissa placed the photos on the table. One by one, the images slid across the polished wood surface, toward the center, toward everyone. People leaned forward, curious, confused. I couldn't see them clearly from where I sat. Not yet. Then my cousin Margaret gasped. A small sound, but loud enough for everyone to hear. I stood slowly. My eyes found the photographs, and my stomach dropped, because I recognized them immediately. Every single one. There I was, walking into a restaurant, sitting at an outdoor cafe, talking to a man, having lunch, leaving a building together. Photographs taken over months, different locations, different days, but always the same man, Thomas. The room remained frozen. No one spoke. No one moved. The photographs sat in the middle of the table like evidence in a courtroom. My hands suddenly felt cold. Melissa, Daniel said again. This time there was warning in his voice. But she kept going. I didn't want to believe it myself. Her voice trembled slightly. Not from sadness. From anger. Or maybe satisfaction. I couldn't tell. I kept telling myself there had to be another explanation. People exchanged uneasy glances. Someone shifted uncomfortably in their chair. I could feel dozens of eyes moving between Melissa and me, waiting, trying to understand. Then Melissa looked directly at me and asked the question that shattered the entire room. How long were you seeing him? For a second, I genuinely didn't understand. The words seemed disconnected from reality, like I had heard them in another language. What? I whispered. Her voice became sharper, louder. How long were you having an affair behind Robert's back? The silence that followed felt endless. A glass slipped from someone's hand. Coffee stopped halfway to a mouth. Every face in the room turned toward me, waiting, judging, searching. I stared at Melissa, certain she couldn't possibly be serious. But she was. Every trace of hesitation had vanished. She believed this, or wanted everyone else to believe it. That's ridiculous. The words barely left my mouth. Melissa laughed bitterly. Is it? She pointed toward the photographs. Then explain these. My heart pounded so hard I could hear it. I looked around the room, at family members, friends, people who had known me for decades. No one spoke. No one defended me. Not even Daniel. And that hurt more than Melissa's accusation ever could. Because in that moment, I realized something terrifying. The question wasn't whether Melissa believed I had betrayed my husband. The question was whether everyone else did. My eyes found my son. My only child. The boy I had raised. The man I had spent my entire life protecting. His face had gone pale. Confused. Shocked. But worst of all, uncertain. Not angry. Not supportive. Uncertain. As if part of him was actually wondering whether it could be true. The realization hit harder than any accusation. I opened my mouth to speak, to explain, to defend myself. But suddenly I felt exhausted. 42 years of marriage. 42 years of loyalty. 42 years standing beside one man. And somehow, all of that seemed weaker than a handful of photographs spread across a dinner table. The room waited. No one spoke. No one moved. And for the first time since Robert died, I felt completely alone. No one spoke for several seconds after Melissa's accusation. The silence felt unbearable. Not because of what had been said. Because of what hadn't. No one laughed. No one dismissed it as absurd. No one immediately said, "That's impossible." The room simply sat there, watching me, waiting, judging. I looked around the table, hoping to find at least one familiar expression. One face that reflected the certainty I felt inside. But certainty wasn't what I saw. Confusion, discomfort, suspicion, and in some cases, curiosity. As if people were mentally rearranging everything they thought they knew about me, trying to make these photographs fit into a story they had never considered before. My hands trembled beneath the table. I folded them tightly in my lap, so no one would notice. The photographs remained spread across the polished wood surface. Silent, powerful, dangerous. Because photographs never tell the whole story, but they tell enough of one. Mom. Daniel's voice finally broke through the tension. I turned toward him. For a brief moment, I saw something familiar in his face. The little boy who used to run into my arms after school. The teenager who cried when his first girlfriend broke his heart. The young man who once told me I was the strongest person he knew. But that boy wasn't sitting here tonight. This was a grown man trying to process something he couldn't understand. His voice was quiet, careful. Who is he? Not an accusation. Not yet. Just a question. But sometimes questions hurt more than accusations. Because they reveal doubt. And doubt had already entered the room. I opened my mouth, then closed it again. The answer should have been simple. It should have been easy. But somehow, standing there under the weight of so many eyes, nothing felt simple anymore. I don't think this is the time or place, I said softly. Melissa immediately let out a short laugh. The sound cut through the room like a blade. Of course not. Melissa, Daniel warned. But she was no longer interested in being cautious. Not tonight. Tonight she had come prepared. Tonight she had something to prove. The woman looked around the table. At relatives. Friends. People who had known Robert for decades. You all deserve the truth. The statement hung heavily in the air. Truth. Everyone suddenly seemed convinced they were searching for it. I wasn't so sure. Because the truth is rarely as clean as people want it to be. Most of the time it arrives messy, incomplete, hidden behind details nobody wants to hear. And sometimes, the truth requires patience. Something this room was rapidly running out of. I slowly pushed back my chair. I think I should go. A collective shift moved through the room. No one tried to stop me. That hurt more than I expected. 42 years of birthdays. Family vacations. Christmas dinners. Hospital visits. Graduations. Weddings. And not one person stood up and said, "Linda, wait." I picked up my purse. My fingers felt strangely numb. As I turned toward the door, I caught sight of Robert's photograph displayed near the entrance. The picture had been taken during our 40th anniversary trip to Maine. He was smiling at the camera, one arm around my shoulders, the ocean behind us. For a brief moment, the sight nearly shattered me, because if Robert were standing here tonight, none of this would be happening. The thought followed me all the way to the parking lot. The cold evening air hit my face the moment I stepped outside. I inhaled deeply, then again, trying to steady myself. The restaurant lights glowed behind me. Laughter no longer drifted through the walls. Only silence. I reached my car and sat behind the steering wheel without starting the engine. For several minutes, I simply stared through the windshield. The accusation replayed again and again inside my mind. How long were you having an affair behind Robert's back? The words felt unreal, like they belonged to someone else's life. Not mine. Never mine. Because there had only ever been Robert. Even during the difficult years. Even during the cancer. Even during the long nights when neither of us could sleep, because we both knew what was coming. Especially then. A memory surfaced unexpectedly. Robert sitting in his favorite chair 18 months earlier. A blanket over his legs. His body weaker than either of us wanted to admit. The television playing softly in the background. I had been reading beside him. Neither of us speaking. Comfortable silence. The kind that only exists after decades together. Then he suddenly reached for my hand. I looked up. "What is it?" He stared at me for a long moment before answering. "Thank you." I smiled. For what? For staying. The memory still broke my heart. Because he knew. And I knew. The end was coming. Yet somehow he was thanking me. As if I could have been anywhere else. As if there had ever been another choice. A tear slipped down my cheek. I wiped it away quickly. The parking lot remained quiet. Dark. Empty. And for the first time since Robert died, loneliness felt different. Not the loneliness of missing someone. The loneliness of being misunderstood. The loneliness of standing completely alone while people rewrite your life without your permission. Eventually I started the engine. The drive home took 20 minutes. 20 of the longest minutes I could remember. Every traffic light felt endless. Every mile heavier than the last. When I finally pulled into my driveway, the house greeted me with the same silence it always did. The silence I had spent 18 months learning to live with. I unlocked the front door, stepped inside, and immediately felt Robert's absence. His reading glasses still sat on the bookshelf. His favorite coffee mug remained in the cabinet. A jacket still hung near the hallway closet. Small things. Ordinary things. Pieces of a life that once felt permanent. I set down my purse and turned on a lamp. Warm light filled the living room. For a moment, I simply stood there, exhausted. Then my phone vibrated. My stomach tightened immediately. A text message. Daniel. I stared at his name. For several seconds, I couldn't bring myself to open it. Eventually I did. Mom. We need to talk. That's all it said. No reassurance. No defense. No, I know this isn't true. Just 4 words. We need to talk. I sat down slowly on the couch. My chest felt heavier than before. Because deep down, I understood something important. Melissa's accusation hadn't created the problem tonight. It had only exposed it. The real problem was trust. And trust had already begun slipping away long before anyone gathered around that dinner table. I thought back over the previous year. Small moments suddenly resurfaced. Comments. Questions. Strange looks. Conversations that felt slightly off. At the time, I dismissed them. Now they seemed different. Melissa asking where I had been one afternoon. Daniel questioning why I couldn't make a family barbecue. Relatives suddenly becoming interested in my schedule. None of it seemed significant then. Now it felt like pieces of a puzzle. Pieces I hadn't noticed until it was too late. Outside, rain began tapping softly against the windows. The sound filled the room. Steady. Lonely. I leaned back against the couch cushions and closed my eyes. For 68 years, I had believed that a good reputation was something you built slowly. Year after year. Choice after choice. Act after act. What I hadn't realized was how fragile it could become. How decades of loyalty could be challenged by a few photographs. How quickly people could question everything they thought they knew. And as I sat alone in the house I once shared with the only man I had ever loved, one painful realization settled deep into my heart. The hardest part wasn't being accused. The hardest part was realizing how many people were willing to believe it. The next morning, I woke up hoping the previous night had somehow been a nightmare. For a few seconds, lying in bed and staring at the ceiling, I almost believed it. Then reality returned. The memorial dinner. The photographs. Melissa's accusation. The silence. And worst of all, the look on Daniel's face. I closed my eyes. No matter how hard I tried, I couldn't stop seeing it. Not anger. Not disappointment. Doubt. A mother's heart notices things other people miss. And what I had seen in my son's eyes frightened me more than Melissa ever could. Because accusations only hurt when people believe them. And for the first time in my life, I wasn't entirely sure my son believed me. The thought stayed with me throughout the morning. While making coffee. While watering the flowers Robert had planted years earlier. While folding laundry that no longer seemed important. Every ordinary task felt heavier than before. Around noon my phone rang. Daniel. I stared at the screen. For a brief moment, I considered letting it go to voicemail. Not because I was angry. Because I was afraid. Afraid of what he might say. Afraid of what he might ask. Afraid of hearing uncertainty in his voice. Eventually I answered. There was a pause. Mom. His voice sounded tired. Older somehow. Neither of us spoke for several seconds. It reminded me of the uncomfortable silence that follows an argument before either person knows how to begin repairing it. Finally, Daniel cleared his throat. Can we meet? I looked out the kitchen window. Rain from the night before still clung to the glass. Okay. Today. I hesitated, then nodded even though he couldn't see me. Today. We agreed to meet at a small cafe halfway between our homes. The same cafe Robert and I used to visit every Saturday morning. I almost suggested another place. But I didn't. Some habits are difficult to break. especially the ones connected to people you've lost. 2 hours later, I sat across from my son in a corner booth. The smell of coffee filled the room. Soft music played overhead. Outside, people moved along the sidewalk as if the world hadn't changed overnight. Daniel looked exhausted. Dark circles beneath his eyes. His shoulders tense. The strain in his expression told me he hadn't slept much either. For a moment, neither of us touched our drinks. Neither of us knew where to begin. Finally he spoke. "Mom." His voice cracked slightly. Then he looked down at the table. "I need you to help me understand." My chest tightened. There it was. Not trust. Not support. Understanding. The language people use when they're trying to decide what they believe. I nodded slowly. "What would you like to know?" Daniel hesitated. Then asked the question I had been expecting. "Who is Thomas?" Hearing his name spoken aloud felt strangely significant. For months, Thomas had existed quietly in the background of my life. Now he had become the center of a storm. I wrapped both hands around my coffee cup. The warmth felt comforting, grounding, necessary. Why does that matter? Daniel's expression immediately changed. Frustration, pain, confusion. "Mom, please." His voice remained calm, but barely. Everyone saw those pictures. I looked away, toward the window, toward the people outside living ordinary lives untouched by rumors. Everyone saw photographs. Then explain them. The words weren't cruel. That made them hurt more. Because Daniel wasn't attacking me. He was pleading with me, trying to reconcile two versions of reality. The mother he knew, and the story Melissa had placed in front of him. I understood his struggle, but understanding it didn't make it easier. I can't explain everything right now. The moment the words left my mouth, I regretted them. Daniel leaned back. Disappointment flashed across his face. Why not? I stayed silent. Because there was no answer I could give. At least not yet. And silence has a way of sounding like guilt. Especially when people are already suspicious. Daniel rubbed his forehead. His exhaustion suddenly seemed deeper. More personal. "Do you know how this looks?" I looked at my son. Really looked at him. And realized he wasn't just questioning me. He was suffering too. His father was gone. His family was unraveling. His wife was making accusations. And somehow he was trapped in the middle of all of it. "I know how it looks." "Then help me understand." I wanted to. God, I wanted to. But some promises carry weight. And breaking them isn't always an option. So instead, I said the only thing I could. "Please trust me." Daniel's eyes closed briefly. The reaction lasted less than a second. But it told me everything. Because trust is easy when there are no questions. The real test comes when questions appear. And right now, questions were everywhere. When he opened his eyes again, something had changed. Not dramatically. Just enough. A small distance. A crack. The kind that starts tiny and grows over time. "I do trust you." But even he didn't sound certain. The conversation never recovered after that. We talked for another 20 minutes. About nothing important. Weather. The grandchildren. Work. Topics neither of us cared about. Both pretending normalcy still existed. Eventually Daniel stood. "So that's it." The question wasn't angry. Just sad. I nodded. "For now." He looked disappointed. Then hugged me. The embrace felt different from every hug that came before it. Shorter. Stiffer. More cautious. And after he walked away, I remained seated long after my coffee had gone cold. Because something inside me knew. The problem wasn't solved. It had only begun. Over the next few weeks, small things started changing. At first, they were almost impossible to notice. Then impossible to ignore. Family group chats became quieter whenever I joined. Phone calls grew less frequent. Invitations arrived later than usual. Sometimes not at all. No one said anything directly. No one confronted me. No one accused me. But distance doesn't need words. You can feel it. In delayed responses. In forced smiles. In conversations that end too quickly. One Sunday after church, I approached a group of women I had known for over 20 years. Women who attended my wedding anniversary parties. Women who brought casseroles after Robert died. Women who once called me one of their closest friends. The moment I walked toward them, the conversation stopped. Not gradually. Immediately. Like someone had switched off a radio. 3 women smiled politely. 2 politely. Then exchanged awkward glances. One suddenly remembered she needed to leave. Another checked her phone. The third looked anywhere except directly at me. The message couldn't have been clearer. Rumors had spread. I drove home that afternoon with tears stinging my eyes. Not because strangers doubted me. Because people who knew me did. That hurt differently. Much differently. A few days later, I attended Emma's piano recital. Family filled several rows inside the small auditorium. Parents. Grandparents. Friends. Everyone smiling proudly. I arrived early and found a seat. Then noticed Melissa across the room. She saw me too. For a brief moment, our eyes met. Her expression remained perfectly pleasant. Perfectly controlled. Yet something cold lingered beneath the surface. She didn't wave. Neither did I. The recital began. Children played. Parents applauded. Life moved forward. But even there, the tension followed us. At one point during intermission, I overheard 2 parents whispering behind me. Not loudly, but loudly enough. That's her. You mean Daniel's mother? Yeah. I stopped walking. My stomach dropped. The second woman lowered her voice. I heard there's some situation. The rest faded into silence when they noticed me standing nearby. They looked embarrassed. I looked devastated. Because rumors don't stay where they start. They travel. They grow. They evolve. And eventually, they become something that feels impossible to control. That night, I sat alone in my living room staring at an old photo album. Pictures of Daniel as a child. Baseball games. Birthday parties. School graduations. A lifetime of memories captured on glossy paper. I turned each page slowly. And with every photograph, one question kept returning. When had things changed? When had trust become so fragile? When had decades of love become vulnerable to whispers? I wasn't angry anymore. Not even at Melissa. I was tired. Tired of defending a life that should have spoken for itself. Tired of watching people search for flaws that never existed. Tired of feeling like a stranger among people who once felt like home. My phone buzzed. A text message. Not from Daniel. Not from family. From Thomas. Just 6 simple words. We need to meet tomorrow. I stared at the screen. For a long time. Because deep down I already knew. The situation was getting worse. Much worse. And whatever happened next would change everything. The next afternoon, I arrived at the small office building where Thomas had asked to meet me. The sky was gray. The kind of gray that seemed to settle over everything. Parking lots. Buildings. People. Even my own thoughts. For weeks, it felt as though my life had been slowly losing color. Not because of the accusation itself. Because of what it had awakened. Doubt. Distrust. Distance. The kind that spreads quietly through families until one day you realize you're standing alone. Thomas was already waiting when I entered the conference room. He stood as soon as he saw me. Concern immediately crossed his face. You look exhausted. I managed a weak smile. I feel exhausted. For a moment, neither of us sat down. Both of us understood the situation had changed. The rumors were no longer isolated. They were spreading, growing, taking on a life of their own. Thomas gestured toward a chair. Seat. I lowered myself carefully into the seat. My body felt heavier than usual, like I had been carrying something invisible for weeks. Maybe I had. Thomas studied me for a moment, then sighed. How bad is it? I laughed softly, not because anything was funny, because I didn't know how else to answer. My son barely trusts me. The words hurt even as I said them. Thomas looked away briefly. The silence that followed was filled with understanding. Not judgment. Just understanding. And right then, that felt like a gift. I saw Daniel yesterday. Thomas nodded. How did it go? I thought about the conversation. The hesitation. The uncertainty. The questions. It felt like I was speaking to someone who wanted to believe me. I paused, but couldn't. Thomas leaned back slowly. His expression grew serious. This is exactly what I was afraid would happen. The statement hung between us. Neither of us needed to explain it. Because we both knew the truth. The longer I remained silent, the more guilty I appeared. That was the cruel part. People say they believe in innocence until proven guilty. In reality, most people believe whatever story makes the most sense emotionally. And right now, Melissa's story was easier to understand than mine. A widow secretly meeting another man. Photographs. Secrecy. Avoided questions. It formed a neat narrative. People love neat narratives. The truth rarely offers them. Thomas folded his hands together. Linda. His voice was calm. Steady. We need to prepare for things getting worse. I stared at him. Worse. He nodded. I think Melissa is escalating. A chill moved through my chest. I already suspected it. But hearing someone else say it aloud made it feel real. What makes you think that? Thomas hesitated, carefully choosing his words. Because people who build a story like this rarely stop halfway. The room suddenly felt colder. I looked down at my hands. She's already turned half my family against me. Not yet. I looked up. Thomas met my eyes. Not half. The correction wasn't comforting. Because we both understood what he meant. Not yet. But possibly soon. When I left the meeting that afternoon, I carried a feeling I couldn't shake. A sense that something bigger was approaching. Like standing near the ocean and realizing the tide is pulling farther back than normal. You don't know exactly what's coming. But you know something is. Over the next 2 weeks, the distance between me and my family grew. Not dramatically. Quietly. That was what made it hurt. Big betrayals announced themselves. Small betrayals happen one missed phone call at a time. One canceled visit. One unanswered message. One awkward silence. At first, I tried to convince myself I was imagining it. Then Emma's birthday happened. And I couldn't pretend anymore. My granddaughter was turning 11. Every year since she was born, I had baked her birthday cake. Not because anyone asked. Because I loved doing it. It had become our tradition. Chocolate cake. Vanilla frosting. Too many sprinkles. Exactly the way she liked it. 3 days before her birthday, I called Melissa. The call went straight to voicemail. I left a message. No response. The next day, I texted. Still nothing. Finally, Daniel called. His voice sounded uncomfortable before he even spoke. Mom. Immediately, my stomach tightened. What is it? A pause. Then another. We already ordered a cake. The words shouldn't have hurt. But they did. Because this wasn't about cake. It was about being replaced. About no longer being included. Oh. Silence. I didn't know. Daniel exhaled softly. Melissa thought it would be easier. Easier. That word again. Everything was always easier when I wasn't involved. Easier if I stayed quiet. Easier if I stayed away. Easier if people didn't have to choose sides. And for the first time, a question entered my mind. Were they protecting the family from conflict? Or protecting themselves from me? I swallowed carefully. Will I still see Emma on her birthday? Another pause. Longer this time. Too long. The answer arrived before the words did. Melissa thinks it might be best if we keep things small. Something inside me cracked. Not loudly. Not dramatically. Just enough. A small fracture spreading through a place that had already been weakened. I stared out the window. The neighborhood looked exactly the same. Cars passing. Children riding bikes. Ordinary life continuing. Meanwhile, my family was slowly closing its doors. I understand. My voice sounded distant. Even to me. Mom. It's okay. But it wasn't. And we both knew it. After the call ended, I sat alone at my kitchen table. The silence in the house felt overwhelming. For a long time, I simply stared at the empty chair across from me. Robert's chair. The one nobody else ever used. A memory surfaced unexpectedly. Years ago, when Daniel was 14, he came home from school devastated. Someone had spread a rumor about him. Kids avoided him. Friends stopped talking to him. That night, he sat right here at this table, crying, humiliated, certain his life was ruined. And I remembered what I told him. I had taken his hand and said, "The people who truly know you won't abandon you because of a rumor." Back then he believed me. Back then, I believed it too. Now I wasn't so sure. A week later, things got worse. Much worse. It started with church. A place that had always felt safe, comforting, familiar. For years, Robert and I sat in the same pew every Sunday morning. The same friends. The same routines. The same community. That morning, I arrived a few minutes early, as usual, and immediately noticed something was different. Conversations stopped when I approached. Not all of them. Enough. Enough to notice. Enough to understand. After the service, an older woman I had known for nearly 20 years gently touched my arm. Her expression looked sympathetic, almost pitying. "Linda." I smiled politely. "Good morning." She hesitated, then lowered her voice. "I just want you to know, nobody's perfect." My heart stopped. For a moment, I couldn't breathe, because suddenly I understood. The rumors had spread farther than I realized. Far enough that people now assumed there was something to forgive, something to overlook, some hidden mistake I was too ashamed to admit. I forced a smile, then walked away before she could say anything else. By the time I reached my car, tears blurred my vision. Not because strangers were judging me, because people who once respected me now pitied me. That hurt even more. That night, I sat alone in the living room. The television played quietly in the background. I wasn't really watching. My phone rested beside me. Silent. No messages from Daniel. No messages from family. No messages from anyone. The loneliness felt different now. Deeper. Sharper. More personal. Then my phone suddenly vibrated. A text message. "Melissa." My pulse quickened immediately. I opened it. Only 3 sentences. But they changed everything. "We need to settle this. There are things the family deserves to hear. Be at Daniel's house Saturday at 6 p.m. I stared at the screen. Read it once. Then again. A cold feeling settled into my stomach. Because those weren't the words of someone seeking peace. They were the words of someone preparing a confrontation. And deep down, I knew exactly what that meant. Melissa wasn't finished. Not even close. She was getting ready to take this further than ever before. And for the first time since the memorial dinner, I became truly afraid. I barely slept the night before. Melissa's message sat in my mind like a warning I couldn't ignore. "We need to settle this. There are things the family deserves to hear." The words replayed over and over as I lay awake staring into the darkness. Part of me considered not going. What was the point? Nothing I said seemed to matter anymore. Every explanation felt incomplete. Every silence looked suspicious. Every attempt to protect the truth only made me appear guiltier. But I knew I had to go. Not for Melissa. For Daniel. For my family. For whatever chance remained. Saturday arrived cold and gray. By 6 o'clock, I was standing in front of Daniel's house. The same house where I had celebrated birthdays, Christmas mornings, graduation parties. The same house where my grandchildren had learned to ride bicycles. Yet as I stood on the front porch, it no longer felt familiar. It felt like I was arriving somewhere I wasn't welcome. I took a deep breath and rang the bell. Melissa opened the door. Her expression was calm. Too calm. The kind of calm people wear when they've already decided how a situation will end. "You're here." I nodded. She stepped aside. Inside, my stomach immediately tightened. The living room was full. Far fuller than I expected. Relatives. Family friends. Several people from church. Even Robert's younger brother. Nearly everyone who mattered. Nearly everyone I loved. They were all there. Waiting. The room fell silent the moment I entered. No one greeted me. No one smiled. The atmosphere reminded me of a courtroom. Not a family gathering. A courtroom. And somehow, I already knew who was on trial. My eyes searched for Daniel. I found him standing near the fireplace. His face looked exhausted. Older. The strain of the past few weeks had carved itself into his features. For a brief moment, our eyes met. I hoped to find reassurance there. Support. Understanding. Instead, I found uncertainty. And my heart sank. Melissa closed the door behind me. The sound echoed through the room. Then she spoke. "Thank you all for coming." The room remained quiet. No one interrupted. No one questioned why they were there. And that frightened me. Because it meant Melissa had already been talking to them. Already building her case. Already shaping the story. She walked toward the center of the room. Confident. Prepared. Certain. Then she looked directly at me. I didn't want it to come to this. The statement almost made me laugh. Not because it was funny. Because it was such an obvious lie. She absolutely wanted this. Every detail had been planned. Every seat arranged. Every person invited. This wasn't an emotional confrontation. It was a presentation. And she intended to finish it. Melissa picked up a folder from the coffee table. My pulse quickened. More evidence. More photographs. More pieces of a story nobody wanted to question. She began laying papers across the table. Restaurant receipts. Printed photographs. Dates. Notes. Timelines. The room watched in silence. Some people leaned forward. Others avoided looking at me entirely. As if eye contact might force them to choose sides. Melissa pointed to one photograph. Then another. Then another. Months of meetings. Months of lunches. Months of conversations. Always with Thomas. Always without explanation. Her voice remained controlled. Measured. Almost professional. The meeting started shortly after Robert passed away. She placed another document on the table. They continued regularly. Another. Sometimes several times a month. Another. Always in private. Each statement landed like a stone. Not because it was false. Because it was partially true. And partial truths are often more dangerous than complete lies. I stood quietly. Listening. Watching. Waiting for someone to ask the obvious question. What if there was another explanation? No one did. The silence was devastating. Finally, Melissa looked around the room. Then asked the question she already knew everyone was thinking. If there's nothing inappropriate happening. She turned toward me. Why won't Linda tell us who Thomas is? Every eye in the room shifted toward me. The weight of their attention felt crushing. I swallowed carefully. My mouth suddenly felt dry. Because for the first time, I realized something terrible. No answer I gave would matter. Not anymore. People had already chosen what they believed. The only thing left was whether I would confirm it. I've already said there are things I can't discuss right now. The room reacted immediately. Not loudly. Subtly. Disappointed sighs. Shaking heads. Exchanged glances. The response sounded weak. Even to me. Melissa nodded slowly. As if I had just proven her point. Exactly. The word echoed through the room. Exactly. Not uncertainty. Confirmation. She looked toward Daniel. And that was when everything changed. Because suddenly this wasn't about Melissa anymore. It was about my son. Daniel stepped forward. Slowly. Reluctantly. Like a man walking toward something he didn't want to face. His eyes met mine. For several seconds, neither of us spoke. Then he asked, "Mom." His voice broke. And hearing that nearly destroyed me. Because I knew he was hurting too. "Please." The room disappeared. The relatives. The evidence. The accusations. All of it faded away. Until there was only my son. Looking at me the way he used to when he was a child. Wanting reassurance. Wanting certainty. Wanting the truth. Please tell me there's something I'm missing. My heart shattered. Because underneath the question was something far worse. Hope. He still wanted a reason. Still wanted to believe. Still wanted me to save him from what he was starting to think. Tears burned behind my eyes. But I held them back. "Daniel." My voice trembled. "I need you to trust me." The moment the words left my mouth, I knew it wasn't enough. His shoulders dropped. Just slightly. But enough. Enough for me to see it. Enough for me to understand. Something inside him gave way. Not completely. Just enough. The final piece. The final thread holding his faith together. And then he said the words that hurt more than anything Melissa had done. More than the rumors. More than the humiliation. More than the judgment. I don't know if I can. Silence. Absolute silence. The room froze. My breathing stopped. For 68 years, I had experienced grief, loss, fear, disappointment. But nothing compared to hearing those 6 words. Not from him. Not from my son. The boy I raised. The boy I loved more than my own life. The boy whose hand I held through every heartbreak. Every mistake. Every failure. And now he looked at me. Like a stranger. Tears finally spilled down my cheeks. I didn't try to stop them. There was no point. Because in that moment, something far more painful than public humiliation had happened. Melissa hadn't taken my reputation. The rumors hadn't taken my dignity. The family hadn't taken my place. What I had lost was much worse. I had lost my son's trust. And standing in that crowded living room, surrounded by people who once called me family, I realized something devastating. For the first time since Robert died, I was completely alone. Not because I had no family, because the family I had spent my life loving no longer knew who I was. I don't remember leaving Daniel's house. Only fragments. The sound of the front door closing behind me. The cold night air. The sting of tears I no longer bothered to hide. Everything else felt blurred. For days afterward, I barely left home. I answered no calls. Ignored messages. Let the world continue without me. Because something inside me had finally broken. Not from Melissa's accusations. Not from the rumors. From Daniel. From hearing my own son say he didn't know if he could trust me. That wound went deeper than anything else. 3 days later, my phone rang. Thomas. I almost didn't answer. Almost. But something in me knew this call mattered. Linda. His voice sounded different. More serious. More urgent. What is it? A pause. Then. It's time. I closed my eyes. For months, I had been waiting to hear those words. Months of silence. Months of suspicion. Months of carrying a burden I could not explain. And now, the waiting was over. What happens now? I asked quietly. Thomas exhaled. We finish what Robert started. The following Friday, every member of the family received the same message. A formal request. A mandatory meeting. Sent through the estate attorney's office. Attendance strongly recommended. No explanation. No details. Just a date. A time. And a location. The law office where Robert's estate had been handled. The same office we had visited together years ago when updating our wills. The same office where Robert spent several private meetings during the final months of his illness. At 6 o'clock that evening, the conference room was full. Daniel arrived first. Melissa beside him. Several relatives followed. Robert's brother. 2 cousins. Even family friends who had become involved in the situation. The atmosphere felt tense. Uncertain. No one knew why they were there. No one except me. Thomas entered precisely on time. A thick folder rested beneath his arm. The room quieted immediately. Melissa folded her arms. Already defensive. Already suspicious. Thomas remained standing. His expression calm. Professional. Measured. The kind of expression people wear when facts matter more than emotions. Thank you all for coming. No one responded. Thomas placed the folder on the table. Then looked directly at Daniel. Before we begin, there is something you should know. Daniel frowned. What is this about? Thomas held his gaze. It's about your father. The room became completely silent. Because even now, mentioning Robert still changed everything. Thomas slowly opened the folder. Inside were documents, statements, financial records, correspondence, years of paperwork. Then he said the sentence that changed the entire room. I was never having an affair with your mother. Melissa immediately shifted in her seat. A flash of discomfort crossed her face. For the first time all evening, she looked nervous. Thomas continued. I am Robert Walker's estate attorney. The silence deepened. Several people exchanged confused looks. Daniel blinked. What? Thomas calmly removed a business card, placed it on the table. Then another document. And another. Official records. Professional credentials. Years of legal representation. Everything establishing exactly who he was. And exactly why he had been meeting with me. Daniel stared at the papers, trying to process what he was seeing. What does this have to do with anything? Thomas turned another page. Then answered. Because 18 months ago, shortly before Robert died, he became concerned. The room froze. Melissa stopped moving. Completely. Thomas continued. Robert discovered several financial irregularities involving family trust accounts and estate funds. Nobody spoke. Nobody breathed. I watched Melissa carefully. Her face had gone pale. Almost imperceptibly. But enough. Enough for me to notice. Thomas pulled out additional records. Bank statements. Transfer histories. Financial reports. Months of documentation. Robert asked Linda and me to quietly investigate after his death if the irregularities continued. Daniel looked stunned. His eyes shifted toward me. Then back to Thomas. Then back to me again. What are you saying? Thomas met his gaze. I'm saying your mother spent the last 18 months honoring a promise she made to your father. The words hit the room like a wave. I felt tears gathering again. Not from pain this time. From relief. Because finally someone was speaking the truth. Thomas opened another file. This time the evidence was impossible to misunderstand. Unauthorized reimbursements. Personal expenses charged to trust accounts. Transfers hidden beneath legitimate transactions. Patterns. Dates. Signatures. Everything carefully documented. Everything carefully verified. And all of it led to one person. Melissa. For several seconds, nobody reacted. The truth was too large. Too unexpected. Too devastating. Then Daniel slowly turned toward his wife. His face looked as though the ground beneath him had disappeared. Melissa opened her mouth. Closed it. Then tried again. That's not what this looks like. But even she didn't sound convinced. Not anymore. Because facts don't panic. Facts don't whisper. Facts don't rely on rumors. They simply exist. And for the first time in months, the truth was finally sitting in the room. Visible. Undeniable. Thomas closed the folder. Then looked directly at Daniel. Your mother remained silent because exposing the investigation too early would have jeopardized everything. Daniel's eyes immediately found mine. The pain in them nearly broke my heart. Because I could see it happening. The realization. The regret. The shame. Every conversation. Every doubt. Every moment he questioned me. Returning all at once. And suddenly he understood something I had known from the beginning. The photographs had never been evidence of betrayal. They were evidence of loyalty. Loyalty to a husband who trusted his wife until his final breath. And loyalty to a promise she refused to break. Even when it cost her the people she loved most. For a long time after Thomas finished speaking, nobody said a word. The conference room felt impossibly quiet. Not because there was nothing left to say. Because there was too much. The truth had finally arrived. And now everyone was trying to figure out what to do with it. Daniel sat frozen in his chair. His eyes never left me. I had seen my son experience many emotions throughout his life. Joy. Fear. Heartbreak. Pride. But I had never seen this expression before. It was the look of someone realizing he had been standing on the wrong side of a door the entire time. And now that the door had opened, he couldn't pretend he hadn't chosen to stand there. Across the table, Melissa remained silent. The confidence she had carried for months was gone. No more carefully prepared accusations. No more certainty. No more control. Just silence. The kind that comes when facts leave no room to argue. Eventually, the meeting ended. People gathered their things quietly. No one rushed toward me. No one offered excuses. No one tried to explain why they had believed the rumors. Perhaps because there was no explanation that would make any of it better. One by one they left. Until only Daniel and I remained. For several moments, neither of us moved. Neither of us spoke. The distance between our chairs suddenly felt larger than the distance between cities. Finally, Daniel stood. His hands trembled slightly. Then he walked toward me. Slowly. Carefully. As though approaching something fragile. Something already broken. When he stopped in front of me, his eyes were red. "I don't know how to fix this." His voice cracked. The words barely escaped. And suddenly, I wasn't looking at a grown man anymore. I was looking at my son. The little boy who used to come to me after making mistakes. The child who never knew exactly how to repair what he'd broken. Only that he wanted to. I felt tears gathering again. Not from anger. Not from vindication. From sadness. Because there are moments in life when being proven right doesn't feel like winning. This was one of them. Daniel lowered his head. "I should have trusted you." The sentence hung between us. Simple. Honest. Painful. Because it was the one sentence I had needed to hear. And the one sentence that arrived too late to erase the damage. For a moment, I couldn't answer. Not because I didn't want to. Because I was remembering. The memorial dinner. The questions. The doubt. The missed birthday. The empty phone calls. The silence. Weeks of standing alone while people decided who I was. No apology could erase those memories. But I looked at my son and realized something important. He wasn't asking for the past to disappear. He was asking for a chance to move forward. And those are not the same thing. Finally, I reached for his hand. The same hand I had held when teaching him to cross the street. The same hand I held in hospital waiting rooms. The same hand I squeezed at his wedding. His fingers closed around mine immediately. Almost desperately. "I'm still your mother." The tears he had been fighting finally escaped. "So how can you even look at me right now?" The question broke my heart. Because it came from genuine shame. Not self-pity. Not excuses. Shame. The kind people feel when they realize they hurt someone they love. I squeezed his hand gently. "Because I've spent your entire life loving you." His face crumpled. And for the first time in months, the wall between us began to crack. Not disappear. Not completely. But crack. And sometimes that's where healing starts. Not with forgiveness. With honesty. The months that followed weren't perfect. Real life rarely is. Melissa eventually faced legal consequences for her actions. The financial investigation moved forward. The family slowly learned details they had never known. Some relatives called to apologize. Others never did. A few relationships recovered. Others didn't. That was simply the reality. Trust takes years to build. Sometimes only moments to damage. And sometimes the damage never fully disappears. Daniel visited often. At first, the conversations were awkward. Careful. Filled with subjects neither of us truly wanted to discuss. But little by little things improved. One lunch. One phone call. One honest conversation at a time. Healing wasn't dramatic. It was ordinary. And because it was ordinary, it was real. Nearly a year later, I found myself standing in front of Robert's grave. The autumn air was cool. Golden leaves drifted across the cemetery grounds. I placed a small bouquet beside the headstone and stood quietly for several minutes. Just listening. Just remembering. 42 years. An entire lifetime condensed into memories. Eventually I smiled. A small one. The kind that comes from carrying both grief and gratitude at the same time. Then I spoke softly. The way I always did when visiting him. "They know the truth now." The breeze moved gently through the trees. I looked down at his name carved into the stone. And suddenly thought about the promise I had made. The promise that had cost me nearly everything. Yet remained worth keeping. I kept my word. My voice trembled. But only slightly. Because for the first time in a very long while my heart felt lighter. Not because the pain had disappeared. Because the truth no longer had to hide. I stood there for another moment before turning to leave. And as I walked away, I carried one final lesson with me. A lesson I wish more people understood. The loudest accusation is not always the truth. The most convincing story is not always the right one. And sometimes, the people who remain silent are not hiding guilt. They are carrying burdens they cannot yet explain. The people who truly love us will not always be perfect. They will make mistakes. They will doubt. They will fail. But love is not measured by whether trust is ever broken. It is measured by whether we have the courage to rebuild it once the truth is finally known. And that, more than anything else, was what Robert had left behind.